Previously in Dark Places.
When you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true.
Welcome to In Dark Places. My name is Jimbo Fugit. I'm in the mountain state of West Virginia. I'm recording this on June 27th. So today I was in the city between the lakes at work and I had me some Mexican food. Went to this little Mexican restaurant and that's our sponsor for the week. Maybe not though after you hear the story. I walked in the door and it seemed like a friendly little place. It was nice, cozy, and I take it the owner was working there at the counter because he was wearing a different shirt than all the other people. So El Jefe came over and kind of ushered me over to the seating area and he said, "Here is your seat," and saw like 4 seats there, so I just grabbed the closest one. He said, "Anyone really?" And at this point I was kind of wondering if this was the Mexican version of Dick's Last Resort. You ever been to that place? I haven't, but I hear stories. And I sat down and he said, "Would you like something to drink?" And yeah. I'm going to be eating. I want to need something to wash it down with. So I told him a sweet tea. And he went to go get my drink, and this lady came with my delicious tortilla chips. El Jefe came back with my sweet tea, and he laid it down on the table and just walked away. And the lady had brought me a knife and a fork and a paper towel, but there was no straw to be seen. So when El Jefe came back to take my order, after I was looking at the menu for a while, I said, "Can I get a straw, please?" So he turned to get a straw, and he just kind of slammed it on the table and walked away. Big Mo. Most of the rest of my visit went without incident. I was sitting there eating my food, and these 2 ladies walked in. I'm guessing like a mother and daughter, and they had a couple of kids with them. And they were taking their order, and I heard the lady say that she wanted some kind of a nacho thing. I don't think it was a nacho supreme because it's a Taco Bell thing, but it was something to do with nachos, a nacho fajita or something she said on the menu. And then she said whatever the meal was without nachos. So I thought, that's kind of interesting. And El Jefe was still there taking orders, and he was making notes. A nacho supreme with no nachos. And then the lady said, "And I don't want any tomatoes and no beans with it either." So I'm guessing that she just got a bowl of lettuce, I don't know. And around this time I was about done with my food. So the first lady that brought my nachos to me came back. She said, "Would you like more drink?" And I said, "No, thank you." She said, "You want dessert?" And I said, "No, thank you." She said, "You sure you don't want no drink?" And, yeah, I'm sure. I'm done. And then later I went on to work and everything was fine at work. And after work I went to Ollie's, the little closeout store place. I was going to buy some CDRs because the Mustang has a CD player in it and I need CDs to listen to. So I was going to record some CDs. The worker at Ollie's was this little millennial kid, and he asked me if I was finding everything okay. I said, "Yeah, do you guys sell CDRs?" And he said, "Excuse me, what is that?" And I said, "CDRs?" And he said, "I don't know what that is. What's a CDR?" And so I was instantly transported back to like 2000 or so, when I was buying CDRs pretty often. And I was thinking of like the folks that are a few years older than me were probably thinking, what in tarnation is a CDR? And now like it comes full circle. The millennial kids don't know what a CDR is. And neither does Mi'kmo. Anyway, this is In Dark Places. This is a paranormal conspiracy theory cryptid type podcast. I'm glad you made it. We have some news. This story was sent in by our friend James. Thanks, James. Possible Bigfoot footprints measuring 16 inches found pressed into Arkansas mud by Dave Malyon. A Bigfoot enthusiast claims to have discovered compelling evidence of the elusive and mythical Bigfoot in Pike County, Arkansas. Chase Whaley, a father of two and a member of the Bigfoot Believers Facebook group, which has over 133,000 followers, shared photos of footprints measuring 16 inches in length, almost twice the size of his own feet. He posted the pictures online, and I will too, on the YouTube version, joking that they had either found Bigfoot or a shoeless meth head, and stated that either way, whatever it was that left the footprint was large. Whaley said that he found the footprints to the west of a small town with a population of less than 1,500. This find has reignited the search for Bigfoot, a mythical creature that has been in the public consciousness for centuries. I always call it mythical. It's not. According to reports, even former President Teddy Roosevelt appeared to believe in the massive beast and mentioned it in his book, The Wilderness Hunter. While some Bigfoot enthusiasts have been at odds with the rest of the world, others have blamed the rise of AI-fueled hoaxes for getting in the way of their search. Bigfoot expert Thomas Markham stated that it is becoming more challenging to verify images of elusive creatures like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster with artificial intelligence and other tools like disposal of pranksters. I'm telling you, that AI stuff, it's the devil. AI hoax attempts are hitting the Bigfoot community almost daily, he said in an interview with the Daily Star. As AI gets better and better, it will become harder to spot the fakes. It is difficult to verify images in general nowadays due to AI created images and the fact that Photoshop and similar programs can create very realistic imagery, said Markham. Our friend the Mothman is back in the news. Illinois woman reports seeing weird winged creature with human face and glowing eyes by Tim Banal. An Illinois woman claims to have encountered a mysterious winged creature that sported a human face with glowing eyes. The unnamed witness conveyed the unsettling account to friend John J. Dunphy, who detailed her story in the Edwardsville Intelligencer newspaper late last week, stressing that his column isn't a prank. He indicated that the witness is not delusional and that she was perfectly sober when the eerie encounter recently took place at around 1 a.m. while she was walking her dog in the city of Alton. According to Dunphy, the woman was understandably unsettled when she and her pet, Pooch, suddenly came upon a creature that was tall, dark, and large. The witness went on to say that the oddity had a human face which was white in color, while also sporting glowing eyes and long black wings that it used to fly away from the scene. The woman observed that she was not the only one to see the strange creature, as her dog had actually growled at it. Curious as to what his friend might have seen, Dunphy posted her account on social media and some people suggested that the creature could have been supernatural in nature, such as the infamous Mothman, or perhaps a ghost. While more skeptical individuals argued that it was likely just a barn owl, the size of a man. Yep. And so far, what exactly the woman encountered remains a mystery, and the unnerved witness told Dunphy that she is now very reluctant to walk her dog in the evening. And now here is your Nicolas Cage Meltdown of the Week.
Just gotta fight through it like a man. Something funny about what I said?
Like a man? We're in the middle of a disaster here. People are suffering. I can't even leave my house. I've already left these people out to dry.
This ain't about you doing your job. This
Of course not. It was never about that for you.
I was the best mayor this city ever had.
And then you lost again and again. Why are you here? Why is he here?
In the late 1970s, a family in North London became the focus of a poltergeist attack, and a great deal of publicity. One of the investigators, Guy Lyon Playfair, tells the story of the Enfield Poltergeist. He thanks Guy. The Enfield Poltergeist first made itself known at about 9:30 p.m. on August 31st, 1977. Mrs. Harper, a divorcee in her mid-40s, was putting two of her four children to bed in one of the three upstairs bedrooms of her semi-detached council house in Enfield, North London, when Janet, age 11, and one of her brothers, age 10, complained that something was making a shuffling noise. Shortly afterward, Mrs. Harper was astonished to see a heavy chest of drawers moving about 18 inches along the floor, well beyond the reach of either child's feet. She pushed it back into place, but it moved again, as before, and this time it refused to budge when she tried to move it. At about the same time, there were four loud knocks that seemed to come from the party wall. Mrs. Harper, as she recalled about a week later, began literally to shake with fear. She was convinced, as were her unusually exuberant children, that something was going on and did not have a normal explanation. Her immediate reaction was just go out of the house. She thought of calling her brother, John Burcombe, who lived 6 doors up the road. But her immediate neighbors, Vic and Peggy Nottingham, still had their lights on, so it was to them she first turned for help. The knocking sounds began again as Vic and his son were making a thorough search of the house. As Vic walked downstairs, the noise seemed to come from the wall right beside him. He immediately searched both front and back gardens, but saw no sign of anybody. They called the police at about 11 p.m., and in the presence of one of the 2 constables, who were soon on the scene, a chair in the living room slid along the floor, more or less as the chest of drawers had done a couple hours earlier. WPC Carolyn Heaps later signed a written statement to this effect, thereby testifying to at least one genuine phenomenon on the very first day of the case. The following day, marbles and pieces of toy brick began to fly suddenly around the house at a great speed. Some, when picked up, were found to be unusually hot. This aerial bombardment went on for 3 days, and by Sunday, September 4th, both the Harpers and the Nottinghams were at their wits' end. By then they had called the police again, sought help from the local vicar and from a local lady who claimed to be a medium, but all to no avail. The Harpers had heard of the Society of Psychical Research, SPR, and the only course of action they could think of was to call the Daily Mirror. They were not seeking publicity. They just wanted somebody to tell them what on earth was going on. Reporter Douglas Bentz and photographer Graham Morris spent Sunday evening with the Harpers. Nothing happened until just after they left at about 2:30 on Monday morning, when the toy brick blitz promptly restarted. Peggy Nottingham's father called them back just as they were driving off. Morris, a veteran Fleet Street freelancer with experience of several violent street demonstrations, had always managed to dodge flying bricks while working. But not this time. As he stood in the living room doorway, with everybody visible through his wide-angle lens, a sharp, cornered toy brick hit him hard on the forehead. At the moment he pressed his shutter. Senior reporter George Fallows was sufficiently impressed by his colleague's experience to follow up the story himself. It was he who explained to the Harpers that what was happening was something known as poltergeist activity, and he suggested calling the SPR. He also asked Mrs. Harper if she wanted to move house, knowing that some council tenants have, in fact, created haunted houses, in the hope of jumping the rehousing queue. Her reply was definitely not. The SPR became involved in the case as a result of a series of coincidences. Maurice Gross, a businessman and inventor, had been a member for barely a year despite a lifelong interest in the paranormal. He had joined after what seemed to him an unusual string of inexplicable events that followed the death of his youngest daughter, Janet, after a road accident in 1976. And he had repeatedly asked the SPR secretary to give him a case of his own to investigate, preferably within reach of his North London home. Therefore, when George Fallows telephoned from Enfield, Secretary Eleanor O'Keefe lost no time in calling Gross, who in turn went at once to the scene, arriving within a couple hours of Fallows' call. He witnessed nothing paranormal on his first visit. He was certain one thing, however: the atmosphere of fear in the Harpers' home was real. That, he reckoned, could not be faked. It was on September 8th that he had his first close encounter with the poltergeist. On that day, the SPR met to hear a lecture, arranged several months previously, by its librarian, Mr. Nicholas Clark Lowes. His subject, poltergeists. At discussion time, Gross leaped to his feet to announce that he was investigating one right now and would appreciate some help. There was not a single volunteer. I happened to be sitting next to Gross, and I is Guy Lyon Playfair. He's the guy that wrote the story, remember him? I happened to be sitting next to Gross, but did not even volunteer myself. I had seen plenty of poltergeist activity during the years I lived in Brazil, but I had written up and published all my cases and moved on to other interests. "Let me know if you get really stuck," I said, without much enthusiasm, as I headed for the local pub with some friends. But Gross went straight to Enfield, and between 10 and 11 p.m., he witnessed more paranormal activity than most SPR members have seen in a lifetime. It was just 3 days after his debut as an investigator of such matters. First, a marble whizzed through the air toward him. It was definitely not thrown by any of the children. Next, the chimes on the living room wall began to sway to and fro, which he found they did not normally do, even when the doorbell connected to them was rung. He then saw a door open and close by itself with nobody anywhere near it, and not just once, but 3 or 4 times. This was followed by an incident identical to one I later witnessed myself, in which a shirt hopped off a pile of clothing on the kitchen table and fell to the floor. Finally, Gross experienced one of the most frequently reported of poltergeist symptoms: a sudden cold breeze that seemed to move up from his feet to his head. Janet Harper always seemed to be near the site of the action, although she was not always near enough to have caused the incidents by normal means, and Gross, therefore, kept a close eye on her at all times. She had certainly not opened or closed the door, levitated the shirt, moved the chimes, or presumably produced the cold breeze. However, she certainly played a few tricks of her own later in the case, as any experienced psychical researcher would expect, since children are, after all, accustomed to imitating what they observe. In a French radio interview in 1982, Janet readily admitted to having done this. She wanted to see, she said, if the investigators would catch her out. And she added, "And they always did." On September 10, 1977, the Enfield case made the front page of the Daily Mirror. The story was picked up by LBC Radio, and that evening, Gross, Mrs. Harper, and Mrs. Nottingham took part in a 2.5-hour Nightline program devoted to it. The following day, there was a detailed account in BBC Radio 4's lunchtime news broadcast by reporter Rosalind Morris, who gave her own first-hand impressions of a night in what the Daily Mirror had justifiably called the House of Strange Happenings. It became clear to me that the Enfield case could prove to be an exceptional one. It was already one of the very few to have been witnessed by an SPR member on the spot and within days of its inception. So I telephoned Maurice Gross and offered my help, which was readily accepted. We agreed that since poltergeist cases seldom lasted more than a few weeks, we should take this opportunity to see a case through to its end. Had we known it would last for 14 months, we might have thought otherwise. I witnessed a relatively minor incident on my first visit on September 11th, as Graham Morris and I stood outside Janet's bedroom, frequently looking through the open door. A marble hit the linoleum floor right in front of my feet. It did not roll or bounce. The sound it made could be repeated only by deliberately placing it on the floor, which the two of us could clearly see that nobody had done. Subsequent events were far more dramatic. The knocking on the walls and floors became an almost nightly occurrence, and its source seemed to have intelligence of a kind, since it would rap out answers to simple questions, 1 rap for no and 2 raps for yes. One evening during a lengthy rap session, Gross asked how many years ago the supposed entity had lived in the house, as it had previously claimed to have done. There followed no less than 53 raps, heard and recorded on tape by both of us, while everybody was in full view. Shortly afterward, however, the rapper began to beat out nonsensical rhythms. That's what rap is, it's just a bunch of nonsense. Oh, okay. The story. Whereupon Gross exclaimed, "Are you having a game with me?" Exactly 2 seconds later, a cardboard box full of soft toys and cushions took off from the corner of the bedroom, flew over the bed, and hit Gross squarely on the forehead. It had traveled about 8 feet in his full view, and I was able to witness at least the end of its inexplicable flight. A BBC television team failed to replicate this. On another occasion, I witnessed a large armchair slide along the floor after Janet, who had just got up from it and was walking toward me, and then crash over backward. This, together with about 30 other incidents witnessed by either Gross or myself, was recorded on tape at the time. Photographer Graham Morris spent much of his time attempting to photograph something paranormal as it actually took place, which he eventually did. He soon found out, however, that poltergeists are camera shy. Moreover, they are skilled saboteurs. On one occasion, when he had fitted 3 separate cameras with flash guns so that they could be fired together by remote control, all 3 flashes were apparently drained of power shortly after being recharged. Eventually, after much patience, he managed to take 2 sequences on his motor-driven camera with high-speed flash recharger, which still awaits satisfactory explanation. It was a lot harder in those days, and there's little flash bars on cameras and stuff. You had to be dedicated to catch something. Oh, you kids today, you got it easy. Morris was not the only professional to suffer mechanical failure of his equipment. A team of enthusiastic ghost hunters from the electrical firm Pi of Cambridge brought along a new Vicon infrared sensitive television camera, state of the art, with which we hoped to do some remote monitoring of the bedroom. The company's chief demonstrator carefully checked all of his equipment before entering the house, but when he began filming, his videotape deck behaved very oddly. All the lights on the machine went on at once, and the tape became jammed so firmly that the entire deck had to be dismantled to free it. And almost the same thing happened later to one of Rosalind Morris's BBC reel tape recorders. Gross and I lost count of the number of times our cassette tapes were found to be mysteriously broken, or wiped wholly, or partially clean. I also discovered that one of my recorders had a metal part bent inside of it, to the complete bewilderment of the repairman, while on one memorable evening the machine disappeared altogether for about an hour, reappearing underneath a heavy dressing table that had fallen forward, landing on Janet's bed and nearly squashing her. The activity soon became so regular and intense that Gross and I were faced with a dilemma. Were we encouraging it just by being there? Should we go away and hope it would stop? We did this twice and were urgently asked to come back on both occasions. It had been suggested that a poltergeist outbreak is a form, conscious and unconscious, of seeking attention. This may be so, yet the Harpers, who gained the attention of the world's press, radio, and television, gave the impression at all times that they just wanted a return to normal life. For the researcher, another dilemma is that one cannot learn more about poltergeists and find ways of helping families afflicted by them without investigating them on the spot. Gross and I did what Mrs. Harper and her brother John Burcombe repeatedly asked us to do: stay with them and try to end the phenomena. We sought the help of several mediums, all of whom achieved a degree of reduction in the activity. Indeed, one of them, a young Dutchman named Dono Meling, may have been responsible for the eventual ending of the case in October 1978. We also were able to stop the phenomena, although only temporarily, by separating members of the family. While the furniture continued to fly around, we felt that it would be in the interests of science to record as much data as possible to engage others to expand their knowledge of mental states, physical systems, and now evident connection between the two that poltergeist phenomena indicate. We had no luck with psychologists, several of whom came to Enfield, or with local doctors or psychiatrists. We did manage to have Janet spend 6 weeks in the Malmesbury Hospital in South London, where she underwent extensive tests for any signs of physical or mental abnormality, but none were found. We were luckier with physicists, and Professor J.B. Hasted, head of the physics department at Birkbeck College, University of London, responded at once to our appeal for technical help by assigning his assistant, David Robertson, to the case for a whole week. In the psychical research, one tends to find what one seeks. The skeptic is confronted with evidence that only adds to his skepticism, whereas the mind of the open-minded tends to be opened even wider. This was certainly the case with Robertson, who already had considerable experience of paranormal psychical phenomena in the form of metal bending, a field in which Professor Hasted had been working on since 1974. A few days after David Robinson had moved into the Harper's home, an exceptionally bizarre series of events took place in front of several witnesses. A full account of all this activity would fill several books, even if it were limited to testimony from reliable witnesses. But the events of one day, December 15th, 1977, stand out from all the rest. It is often suggested that poltergeist activity is associated with young children close to the age of puberty. This is not always true. Cases are on record in which no children were involved. But it was true for the Enfield case. For some days prior to this, an extraordinary raucous male voice had been making itself heard, apparently emanating from her throat, over which Janet herself repeatedly stated she had no conscious control. The voice claimed several identities, all of whom male and none of them verifiable, with two notable exceptions. Whether it was a manifestation of a secondary personality or an independent entity cannot be established. At times, its conversation closely resembled that of Janet in her normal state, but occasionally it provided true information not known to her. It gave an account of the manner and place of death of the former occupant of the house, who had died before Janet was born, the details subsequently being verified. Whatever the true origin of the information provided by Janet's bass voice, it gave the investigators the chance to address the presumed source of the poltergeist disturbances directly. As soon as physicist David Robertson joined the team, he lost no time in attempting some practical experiments. Hoping to be able to observe human levitation, he asked Janet to bounce up and down on her bed and attempt to take off. He was then ordered out of the room by the voice. And when he heard Janet call out that she was being levitated, he found he could not open the door. A bed had apparently been pushed against it. Rose, Janet's elder sister, became alarmed and went to fetch her neighbor Peggy Nottingham. Janet then attempted another levitation, again with the door closed, and subsequently claimed that not only had she risen into the air, but had passed through the wall of her semi-detached house into Peggy's bedroom on the other side of it. Nobody believed her. Mrs. Nottingham had already witnessed a good deal of strange activity since the first day of the case in August of 1977, some of it in her own house, but this was a bit too much. She calmly told Janet to try it again, and then went back into her house, where she later admitted she half expected to find Janet, but Janet was not there. But on the carpet beside her bed, Mrs. Nottingham found a book belonging to Janet. It had certainly not been there when she had made her bed, and Janet had not been in her house. Robertson then handed Janet a large and heavy plastic-covered sofa cushion and asked her to make it disappear. He was hoping to obtain direct evidence for one of the most controversial of all alleged paranormal phenomena: teleportation, the passage of a solid matter through a solid matter. A local tradesman later testified that At this time, he was walking along the road toward the Harper's house when he suddenly saw a large red cushion appear on its roof. In his direct line of vision, had anybody opened the bedroom window and leaned out to place it on the roof, he would certainly have seen them. This was not all the tradesman saw. When he arrived outside the house, he could see Janet through the upper bedroom window, as he put it, floating horizontally across the room, accompanied by books, dolls, and cushions that seemed as if they were being whirled around on pieces of elastic. The tradesman's evidence is of interest since he did not know the Harpers and did not believe a word of what neighbors had told him concerning their poltergeist. What he saw that day made him change his mind and left a profound and lasting impression on him. Much of his testimony was supported by another eyewitness, school crossing supervisor Mrs. Hazel Short, who was on duty right across the road from the Harper's house. She too insisted that she had seen Janet definitely horizontal in the air. And from her description, the investigators later calculated that Janet must have been about 28 inches above her bed, the mattress of which was hard and firm. A further witness, contacted several weeks later, was apparently still too confused and frightened by what she had seen to make a statement. Whatever really happened in Enfield on December 15th, 1977, several witnesses undoubtedly saw a good deal they could not explain. Several other members of the Society for Psychical Research, in addition to Chief Investigator Maurice Gross, David Robertson, and myself, Guy Lyon, thanks Guy, made visits to the Enfield house during the case, but almost none of them witnessed anything they considered paranormal. This inevitably led some of them to cast doubts on the evidence presented by Gross and myself at the 1978 SPR International Conference in Cambridge, and subsequently led to considerable controversy about the case. How good is the evidence for the reality of the Enfield Poltergeist? Whatever its quality, which ranges from unverifiable subjective reports of apparitions to signed written statements by a number of responsible people, it cannot be denied that more documentary evidence was gathered on this case than on any previous one of this type. About 200 hours of tape recording were made, and a special committee of SPR carried out a lengthy follow-up investigation, during which most of the principal witnesses were re-questioned. The photographic evidence has tended to add to the controversy surrounding the case. Although much of it is not quite up to professional standards, freelance photographer Graham Morris spent much of his time in the house over a period of several weeks, hoping to record paranormal activity as it happened. And 2 of the many sequences he obtained on his remote-controlled, motor-driven camera are of special interest. One shows 2 pillows, one of which is in mid-air and the other on the floor, but still apparently in motion. The other shows Janet's bedclothes seemingly being pulled off her, while at the same time the curtain beside her bed twists into a tight spiral and seems to blow into the room, although the window had been closed. This curtain twisting phenomenon was observed several times by Janet, who claimed that it once wrapped itself around her neck as if trying to strangle her, and also by her mother. She, it must be emphasized, was ready at all times to denounce her daughter if she were caught playing tricks, as she occasionally was later in the case. While gathering evidence The investigators made what attempts they could to obtain evidence of some scientific value. With the cooperation of one of Britain's leading phoneticians, Maurice Gross managed to record Janet's deep voice on a larynograph, an instrument that registers patterns made by radio frequency waves as they pass through the larynx. The results confirmed what a speech therapist had already deduced, that the deep voice was not produced by Janet's normal vocal equipment, but by the so-called false vocal folds. Actors can learn to speak with these, but for most people it is a painful process. Yet Janet, or the poltergeist, could keep it up for 3 hours without her normal voice being affected at all. It is also worth noting that abnormally deep voices coming from young girls are a recognized symptom of poltergeist cases. Numerous examples are given in T.K. Ostrich's book Possession, Demonical and Other from 1966, such as that of 11-year-old Dinah Dagg, through whom a dark, gruff voice of an old man instantly replied in a language which cannot be repeated here. At Enfield, the closet, we came to a properly controlled scientific experiment was David Robertson's paranormal metal bending test. He attached a piece of metal to a strain gauge and a chart recorder so that any strain on the metal would be recorded on paper. During the 2-hour session, while Janet was under continuous observation and not touching the metal, several sharp deflections appeared on the chart. Robertson saw the metal bend through about 15 degrees before it finally snapped in half. In 1982, 4 years after the Enfield Poltergeist disturbances had ended, Janet took part in a strictly controlled laboratory experiment at Birkbeck College, London, supervised by Professor J.B. Hasted, head of the physics department, and observed by 4 others including Robertson and Gross. The purpose of the experiment, which was one of a series using several different subjects, was to examine the possibility that certain people can lose weight paranormally, a phenomenon that, if genuine, is clearly related to that of levitation. Clearly. And since Janet had already been reported as having levitated, she seemed a natural choice for the subject. She sat on a chair placed on a specially constructed platform that functioned as a weighing scale. This was connected to a computer and a chart recorder, which monitored any change in weight. If someone stands on this platform and jumps into the air, the chart will show a peak above the stable baseline trace, and this will be followed at once by a downward deflection on the chart when the body lands. However, the apparatus began to behave abnormally very shortly after Janet sat on it. The observers were surprised to find that although Janet had sat perfectly still on the chair, the pin of the chart recorder had moved steadily upwards for about 30 seconds, and during this time it had also recorded several sharp peaks. 2 of these surges were so strong that the pin had run off the top of the paper. According to the chart, Janet had lost about 2 pounds in weight for 30 seconds. "I cannot explain this in normal terms," said Hasted. Professor Hasted points out the experiments he conducted with Janet are not proof of levitation. He thinks it is possible, however, that in view of her record as a metal bender, she may have been exerting a psychokinetic influence on the piano wires on which the platform was suspended. Indeed, the brief bursts on the chart were similar to those recorded during successful metal bending sessions with other subjects. Whatever the explanation, Janet seems to have had a paranormal effect on the weighing machine. It is gratifying that some positive results have emerged from the destructive chaos of the Enfield Poltergeist case, which put a severe strain on both the Harper family and the SPR investigators who stayed with them until the disturbances ended in October 1978. If future poltergeist victims are as cooperative as the Harpers, and scientists follow the lead of the likes of Professor Hasted, we shall surely learn more about how the human mind can, in certain states, apparently influence solid objects.
Look who's playing center field! Look who's wearing center field!
And we're out of bleach.
Try mine, Joe.
That's not my bleach.
Trust me.
Joan is trying Biz Bleach. With energized cleaners, even liquid bleaches don't have. So Biz cleans muddy dirt better.
I can't believe these are the old red and white. What was that bleach?
Biz bleach.
Well, I'm impressed.
So am I.
Discover Biz Bleach for a cleaner, whiter wash.
The saga of the Enfield Poltergeist may have begun with genuinely paranormal phenomena, but was it kept alive by the very presence of its investigators? Several of the cases many critics believe this was so. One of them, Anita Gregory, sums up. Guy Lyon Playfair, in his book This House is Haunted, 1980, has written an interesting and lively account about happenings in the Harper's Enfield Council House. Giving his impressions of what he and his co-investigator, Maurice Gross, felt went on there, it is my opinion that Guy Playfair and Maurice Gross may perhaps have experienced genuine paranormal happenings, particularly toward the beginning of the case. However, neither anything I saw or experienced when I visited the house, nor the content of either Mr. Playfair's book or Mr. Gross's defense of it suggests to me that there is evidence here for anything other than a chaotic and, at times, distressing state of affairs. To begin with, like all the other researchers, I was excluded from the children's bedroom, where the phenomena were supposed to occur. We would all stand or sit on the landing or in adjoining rooms, waiting, and then there would be a thump or a squeal. Everyone would dash in and see Janet sitting on the floor, the claim being made that the entity had thrown her out of bed. By way of evidence, we were assured that Janet could not possibly have jumped that far. However, not only were the bedroom walls decorated with certificates testifying to Janet's athletic prowess, but of course there was no need for her to jump at all. A thump on the floor would have sufficed. Nor was my impression that the girls were play acting lessened in the least when, as a special favor, I was eventually allowed in the girls' bedroom when phenomena were supposed to be actually happening. I had to stand facing the door, covering my head with the girls' quilted dressing gowns and other garments hanging there, while amid much giggling, slippers were shilled at my head. I made it more than clear that I did not regard the incidents as anything other than a game, and I felt convinced that the girls were rather relieved that I, at least, was treating this as a joke. My lighter approach, I told the girls, that all good poltergeists go to bed at 11 p.m., for example, was never held against me by the family, who also welcomed me most cordially, nor by the voices themselves, who allowed me into the sanctuary when the true believers were excluded. I found the voices wholly unconvincing as anything other than childish play acting. Almost invariably, the children would cover their mouths with blankets or sheets, or simply avert their faces while producing this phenomenon. Maurice Grosse actually believed that the explicitives uttered were proof of supernatural origin. Where, I was asked, would nicely brought up girls get such a word from? The deep, hoarse voices were originally elicited in response to exceedingly leading questions by Maurice Grosse, who asked the entity to speak to him, and the first voice was produced within minutes of being requested. Moreover, no evidence has been offered that the voices were continuous for 2 or 3 hours on end, as was frequently claimed. To demonstrate such continuity would require a great deal of scientific work, showing the proportions of voices to silence over prolonged periods, which could then be analyzed by qualified sociologists. I must say that I never heard the voices in anything other than quite short snatches. I described what I had heard to a senior hospital consultant who has extensive experience of teaching the various techniques of voice production to patients who, for example, have lost their vocal cords as a result of operations. She laughed at the notion that Janet's gruff voice was anything remotely paranormal, and suggested that a child could quite easily teach herself to talk like that. I am not an expert in this field myself, but I have yet to be convinced that there is even a case to answer. Moreover, so far as I know, these voices never said anything that was at all paranormal, in the sense of being true but unknown to the children. And Janet, who experienced most of the hauntings, dismisses the views of skeptics who say that she and her family made up the Enfield Poltergeist. "I don't care what they think," she said. "I know what happened, and I know it was real." And that's about all the big show for this week. The Enfield Poltergeist case was investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren on a couple of occasions. The family lost a couple of their beloved pets during the Enfield Poltergeist. And the 1982 movie Poltergeist was loosely based on that story when they were saddened by the death of their pet goldfish, because the people in the Enfield case lost some of their goldfish. The deep voice of that one guy, Spirit Bill, said that he electrocuted the fish with his spirit energy. And Ghostbusters kind of has a loose connection to it as well, because a medium visited the house and started letting out a cry, "Go away," and started to moan, "Gozer, Gozer, help me." So Dan Aykroyd heard about Gozer, and he used the name for the Ghostbusters movie, Gozer the Destructor. Anyway, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Was there any truth to the Enfield Poltergeist case, or was it just all a big hoax played by those girls? Anyway, I'm glad you joined us, and thanks for listening, and hope you had a good time. I did. And we'll see you again right here next week. God bless you.